All right, we're getting a lot more people trickling in. So as you're trickling in, like I was saying, go ahead and pop in where you're joining in from the chat here. We'd love to see where people are coming from. We're from Seattle ourselves. Okay. But we are 2 p.m. here on the dot, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Marissa, and welcome to AMM Talks. It's a virtual forum for established wedding professionals to share their expertise with new ministers and to help them grow as officiants. Like I said, I'm Marissa. I'm the marketing and events coordinator here at AMM, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Jessica. She's AMM's lead writer, and she'll be helping out behind the scenes, so please send her a message in the chat if you have any technical questions. Our topic today is how to become a more inclusive wedding officiant and how we can make the wedding space more welcoming to LGBTQ plus couples and non-traditional families. We'll be learning from officiant Maria Michalski. Maria is a wedding planner and wedding officiant based in Nashville, Tennessee, and she uses she, her pronouns. She runs a thriving business called Pride of Place Weddings and holds a Master of Divinity degree from Vanderbilt Divinity School. Maria specializes in creating sacred weddings, experiences, and spaces for all families. With a focus on LGBTQI plus marriers, she provides gender and sexuality tailored advice and consulting. She connects couples with other inclusive vendors and creates unique non-religious and multi-religious wedding ceremonies for couples in all budget ranges and much more. So let's hear from Maria, and then we'll open things up for questions at the end here. So Maria, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. It's so great to see that we have people from across the country and even from a few additional places. So glad to join you all today. I have been an American Marriage Ministries officiant since 2016. I did my first wedding in 2017. So it's wild to think that it's now been about 7 years. I am also a wedding planner and coordinator, so I added in a few extra things in there. And like was just mentioned, my business, Pride of Place Weddings, is centered on serving LGBTQIA plus clients, specifically, not exclusively. Also working with couples of all genders and sexualities to ensure that their wedding is a welcoming and supportive space for people of all genders and sexualities. The title of this talk today, we decided to focus on being a more inclusive officiant working with LGBTQIA plus populations, but also addressing polyamory and working with polyamorous clients and marriers, and thinking through a few elements of becoming a more trauma-informed officiant. So in my additional work outside of being an officiant, I am also a professional trainer and consultant around a variety of topics around gender and sexuality and trauma-informed care. So just bringing all of these things together. To begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about being an LGBTQIA plus centered officiant, how I got here, what this means to me, and doing that in an area of the country where we are unfortunately at this point in time known for being pretty unfriendly to LGBTQIA plus folks. This feels especially important. I serve couples in all 50 states, but my home base is in Nashville, Tennessee. And it feels like this work is actually more important now than ever in this area because people are really desperate to ensure that who they're working with for their marriage ceremonies is inclusive and affirming, and more than that, celebratory and well-versed in their identity and prepared to work with them in a way that doesn't feel like a chore for the couple. Personally identifying as queer, having come out of religious spaces, having a divinity degree, being married myself, and having moved through that process, I know how difficult it can be to vet vendors, to find an officiant who works well with you and understands your gender and sexuality. I'm going to highlight some of the key areas that I think are most important to think through when working with LGBTQIA plus clients. The first being basic competency. So Google is our friend. There are a ton of really wonderful resources out there to use in order to help to educate yourself on basic language. And I'm going to plug one into the chat in a moment here, called the Flying Gender Unicorn, which I'm hoping many of you have seen. But if you have not, this is the most recent iteration of an ever-evolving resource called the Genderbread Person that has been developed over the last decade plus to help people better understand what different forms of gender and sexuality identity mean, what the letters in the LGBTQIA+ acronym actually stand for, and how these apply to experiences and personal presentation. So I'll drop that in the chat now as a resource that people can refer to if this is new for you or an area where you've had less of an opportunity to access resources and education around language. So that's first and foremost. If you don't know, Google's got the information for you. Secondly is to educate yourself on local laws and legal battles. Currently, as we know, same gender sexual marriage equality is currently legal in the United States at a federal level. There are conversations abounding about what this is going to look like over the next 4 years, the next 8 years. And lots of folks on the ground doing important advocacy work to ensure that this right remains solidified and retained. And something that is also important to look at is the ways that people are using different parts of the law to impact people's access to affirming officiants. For instance, in Tennessee, there has been a back and forth conversation and battle for several years. I'm hoping my power doesn't go out in the middle of this call. I do have a storm rolling in, so if I disappear, you'll know why, but I'm hoping I don't. And if I do, I'll try to rejoin on my phone. But in Tennessee, one of the ways that this issue has been come at sideways is thinking through the ways that the law can impact who is legally allowed to officiate wedding ceremonies by trying to limit online officiants, people who have been ordained online from officiating. When that happened, when I started my business in 2020, American Marriage Ministries did an in-person tour in Tennessee to offer in-person ordination and affidavits proving ordination to any of us who needed it, which I'm very grateful for. So these are the kinds of things that we just want to watch out for in our own state so that we can think through how it's impacting populations who already have a difficult time accessing officiants, especially, say, the LGBTQIA+ population who have a hard time accessing officiants who are affirming in religious spaces and then are therefore much more limited to legal officials in a courthouse or finding officiants who have been ordained online or in another context, say. Are there any, I just want to say, if there are questions, please feel free to plug them in the chat. We've got our friends over at American Marriage Ministries watching the chat, so I love questions and I am happy to pause throughout to answer them. The next piece that I think is really important for working with LGBTQIA+ populations is, whenever possible, offering to help kind of vet other vendors you might be working with, things like accompanying them to pick up their license. We would hope that none of your clients, none of your marriers have an issue picking up their license if they are overtly and clearly part of the LGBTQIA+ community, but we do unfortunately hear of county clerks and other legal officials giving folks a hard time accessing their license, and sometimes just having the support and the accompaniment of an officiant who feels comfortable with these systems, knows how they're supposed to work, can make someone feel safer and more confident in going through that process, and can be a real extra step and comfort and support for your clients. Some more relational aspects to keep in mind if you're working with LGBTQIA+ clients directly. When you're in those kind of planning sessions for their ceremony, we want to be thinking through things like not assuming those clients' relationship to family, religion, or sexuality. Just because one person in a couple identifies as LGBTQIA+ does not mean that both people do. just because someone may be seeking a non-religious ceremony or identifies as queer doesn't mean that they necessarily have a bad relationship with religion, or we shouldn't also assume that they have a decent relationship with religion. We should definitely lead with consent and ask. And the same goes for people having really complex relationships with their own families, and how those families might be integrated into their ceremonies and celebrations. Those are some important pieces. I also just want to note, in case this isn't overt, to just be prepared to go the non-traditional route. People who want their LGBTQIA plus identity to show up in their ceremony are often going to be people who want to shirk things like gendered traditional rituals and language in their ceremony, are people who are going to be looking for something uniquely them in their ceremony and might need help and access heading towards building a ceremony that feels like them. So being prepared, doing some research on texts that people can use, alternative texts, texts that aren't as harmful as other texts. Something I keep in my back pocket is the Queer Bible Commentary when I'm working with couples who have some kind of ties to Christianity and might want a biblical scriptural text. Also, this covers the Hebrew Bible as well and is good for working with couples of Jewish descent in some capacity. This walks through most of the key pieces of the Bible and can offer affirming and alternative readings that are queer and queer friendly for clients. I write ceremonies using these very frequently, and I'll show you all an example if you'll give me a minute, if I retain my internet connection, all of these things. So this June, wrong screen. I hope that I'm like everyone else on this call and have as many open tabs on my computer as everybody else does. Okay. So this is a sample of a ceremony that I performed this June for a queer couple. Friends of mine one of whom comes from a Methodist background, one of whom comes from a Mennonite background, neither of who identify as Christian or religious in any capacity anymore, but do identify as spiritual and have deep ties to scripture. And they wanted something that highlighted their relationship and honored the space that they had come together in spirituality. So they also happened to get married in a state park in Tennessee called Cedars of Lebanon. And there are a lot of great ties in Christian biblical texts around cedars and around the place of Lebanon. And so I was able to pull a passage or two from the Queer Bible Commentary and discuss the space that cedars and the space of Lebanon holds in biblical texts around strength, home, kinship, strength in the face of adversity, and tie that into some of the reasons why I named my own business what I named it. And I'll just read a section of that here. I pulled my own name for my business from the Queer Bible Commentary as well. And this passage that says, for Jesus's queer audience, it becomes clear that Jesus affirms the loyalty to justice and truth that supersedes traditional family. And in God's kingdom, non-traditional relationships are given a pride of place, for they are often more authentic because they're not enthralled to patterns of domination. And on my website, I talk a little bit about how that comes from a Christian background, but has applicability across religious and non-religious and spiritual identities, which is very important to me. And so we talked about during Pride Month, having a wedding, celebrating queer love in the midst of so much political and social upheaval, how that felt super important to celebrate and hold that same pride of place for this couple. That's one example of how I might use these resources. Yes, I also saw in the chat, I love someone noticing that little language things like using the word kingdom instead of kingdom to move away from gendered language, if that feels comfortable to clients. Those are some examples of little tiny language changes you can make that make a big difference. Yes. And that was really my last piece, is that for LGBTQ couples, is that language is key. Doing anything you can to examine your script templates, the way you address these things with clients, resources you might point clients to, and seeing, is there gendered language here? Is there language that is hetero assumptive or assumes a certain religious makeup or a certain couple makeup in terms of sexuality? And how can I unpack that and take a step back from that to help build something that feels unique to this couple is really important. And then as you build new templates, you'll have language that feels comfortable. So my template that I always start off with couples simply holds space for pronouns and holds space for names. And I walk through with couples and have them fill in the blank. So at the end of a ceremony, I don't assume I'm going to be saying, "You may now kiss the bride." I see what the gender makeup is of the couple I'm working with and ask how they'd like to be pronounced and offer alternatives like, "You may now share in your first married kiss," or "You may now seal your vows with a kiss," or whatever feels comfortable to them. I'm going to pause there before I move on to talking about polyamory. I don't think I saw any major questions coming in the chat, so maybe I'll keep moving. I know we're going to have a Q&A section too. Okay. Let's talk about polyamory, which is a whole nother slice of this pie. Polyamory is definitely something that is becoming a bit more popular in public conversation these days. If it is new to you, polyamory is an identity of someone who holds romantic attraction for multiple people at the same time and might engage in multiple relationships at the same time because of that. In the United States, marriage can only happen between one person and one other person. But opening up our abilities to provide polyamorous commitment ceremonies to people who identify as polyamorous is one way that we can honor these identities and help provide services and access for people who identify as polyamorous, which I do. And so there's several different ways, not just a few. I was going to say a few, but there's actually several different ways that this can look, or that you might have clients coming to you seeking these services. And the most important thing to keep in mind first is that polyamory is unfortunately still considered taboo or a touchy subject. And so some people might be very shy or have a hard time sharing this information with someone as they're looking for an officiant to hold this space for them. So it's just really important to remember that it's an honor and a privilege to have someone trust that with you and to seek to work with you in that capacity. Polyamorous clients might come to you looking to simply have a wedding between two partners, but looking to ensure that they have an officiant who can respect their identity as polyamorous and respect that they might want to give their other partners space in their ceremony in some way. And so that is a pretty simple, straightforward wedding, but with caveats for acknowledging other people in their relationship and not assuming that their identity is monogamous. You may also have clients coming to you looking for some combination of a polyamorous commitment ceremony, which would look like a wedding, but we steer away from that language because we never want anybody to have any kind of legal lack of clarity that you're not performing multiple marriage ceremonies for one person and you're not offering a legally binding ceremony in that way, but rather you're offering a non-legal commitment ceremony for multiple people at the same time. So in that capacity, we're looking for our own ability to hold space and craft a ceremony that honors the relationships, that uses terms of commitment, of chosen relationships, of similar structures like invocation, welcoming, rituals, readings, vows, pronouncements of commitment, and also holding those legal responsibilities that we have at the same time. What is most important when working with polyamorous folks, whether they be a couple who also have other partners, a triad, anybody who falls under this umbrella, is that we ask what language feels good to them. We don't assume what their needs are, the relationships of people who are joining in the ceremony, or how these folks might want to be included. And instead, we lead with asking for consent. We lead with asking for as much information as possible. And we show that we're prepared to help navigate some creativity and moving into spaces that people don't have a ton of resources around. So things that we might want to make especially clear is that it is perfectly legal to preside over a commitment ceremony, as long as we don't say that we are providing a legal service. We, make it clear to our clients, and we steer away from language like weddings and marriage. You can even provide a ceremonial decorative certificate of a commitment ceremony to your clients, and that's perfectly legal as well. We also want to make sure that we honor the commitments that people have present and offer to find creative ways for them to include their partners in a way that feels comfortable to them, first and foremost. Okay. I am gonna move on to talking about trauma-informed officiating, knowing that we're going to circle back to all of these topics in the Q&A as I'm watching this weather pour in and hoping my internet holds out. Weddings are a time that we are taught to think of as something that is centered on joy and connection and relationship and fun and celebration, and they are. Weddings are also a time, more so than many other times in people's lives, that trauma comes up. Not necessarily that weddings are traumatic, but they are a time of intensity, spending a lot of money, being surrounded by every single person you're connected to deeply in your life, focusing intensely on relationships and commitment, and being in the spotlight in front of people. And that can bring up trauma for people expectedly and unexpectedly. So some things that you might encounter coming up for clients, especially around working on their wedding ceremony with you as an officiant, which is a very intimate part of the day, and the part of the day where they are most spotlighted in front of all of their guests for having an intimate and really significant commitment in front of their guests. You might see things like triggers and trauma around homophobia that they've experienced if they're LGBTQIA+ from their family members or in public. People who are getting remarried or who have experienced divorce in another arena of their life might have divorce trauma and struggles or symptoms or anxiety around marital commitment in general, and genuinely want to engage in this process, but might unexpectedly have some of that trauma come up. This is also a time where any other form of relationship trauma might surface: intimate partner violence, any form of sexual assault, etc. So just holding space in case this kind of stuff comes up unexpectedly for people. The most fun and the most trying part of working weddings in general, as an officiant, as a planner, I find, is the families. And typically that is the feedback I get from my marriers as well. And so that also means that any form of familial trauma, familial abuse, or missing family members who couldn't make it, or who have sadly passed away and cannot be present at the wedding, might come up, especially when you're thinking through the ceremony, which is the most intimate and significant part of the day. We're also looking at religious trauma. And oddly enough, this one I don't hear a ton of people expect, but eating disorder trauma can also come up, because it is someone having to stand in front of a group of people and have eyes on them, and that can trigger a lot of body image stuff. It's a huge list of traumas that might come up. So just being aware of that and being able to focus and build a container with your clients of safety and transparency and authenticity can go a long way in helping them to feel able to vocalize if that stuff is coming up, so they can just be aware, everybody can be aware of it in the process, and to walk through with them, how can I offer you alternate structures, language, tiny caveats that might make you feel that much more grounded, that much more safe, that much more comfortable. Some examples of that might look like, I had some clients who had familial stuff going on, they had homophobia going on, they had eating disorder stuff going on, and they had a ton of anxiety about being up in front of everyone, even for a very short ceremony. And so we ensured that their ceremony was as short as comfortably possible for them. And they opted to have very simple, quick, kind of rote vows in their public ceremony, and then to have a private vow exchange beforehand in place of a first look that was just between the two of them and me, so that they didn't have to do that super intimate part in front of everybody else, but they got to have that moment to themselves, and they still had it be special and something that we worked on together and that they had helped crafting those vows. That's an example of an alternate structure you might offer. Sometimes clients might also need you to give them permission to say what they need to their families, to say, I don't really want to do this in my ceremony, or I only want these people to be involved, or I don't really like this element. And just saying, that's okay. That's an option. I'm happy to help work with you to find another option can be super freeing to a client that you're working with. And then always leading with consent. Not assuming that somebody wants any particular ritual element, reading, language, etc., but instead saying, here's my most basic open template. Let's fill it in together. Can help clients so much, because if you offer them all of the traditional or fill in the blank elements, language, etc., it is harder for somebody to back out of that than to fill in a blank creatively together. That is the basic structure that I have. I know we've got questions and comments, so I'm going to turn to some of those now.
Hi, I have a question. So isn't poly illegal in the US though? So how does that work?
That's a great question. So polygamy or bigamy, or the practice of being married to multiple people, is what is illegal in the US. That is different from polyamory, which is simply the orientation and practice of being in multiple romantic partnerships that are not legally bound to multiple people.
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned that, can you hear me? Okay. Mentioned that during a polyamorous commitment ceremony or a marriage ceremony for people who are poly, that the partners might want to create space in that ceremony for another person. Can you give a couple examples of what that might be, or how that might look, how it might work?
Yeah, absolutely. I love doing commitment ceremonies like that because people get so creative. So any special job that you see people assigned to a family member, a close friend, a wedding party member, might be assigned to a partner. And so that can look like having other partners who are not directly involved in the wedding ceremony read readings, or be part of the wedding party, walk somebody down the aisle instead of a parent, things like that. People might also have other partners acknowledged in their wedding ceremony, even if their ceremony is just between two members of that group. And so that might look like having a part of the script that acknowledges the way that the rest of their partners support their relationship and help them to flourish and maintain their commitments and vows to each other. So it can look a lot of different ways.
Great, and it looks like we had a couple of questions here in the chat if we wanted to pop back over there. The first one says, can we do a commitment ceremony in court?
Now, that I would say is likely not an option, simply because commitment ceremonies are not legal ceremonies. And so I think you would be hard pressed to find a court that was willing to accommodate one. You can certainly have a legal wedding ceremony that's done, say, at a courthouse, and bring your additional partner. Unfortunately, courthouse weddings and wedding officiants are maybe less well versed to tailor those ceremonies to also include other partners, which is part of the reason that we have so many wonderful officiants on a call like this who can help to provide those tailored services. But having a commitment ceremony in a court would indicate that it would be a legal ceremony, which is not something that is an option at this time.
Hi, everybody. You know, I more or less have a comment first and then a question. You know, I have performed a lot of ceremonies for the LGBTQIA community plus, but I always, you know, I often wonder when I'm interviewing couples, and actually I was interviewed by a very famous chef, and it was important to her to have somebody in the community to officiate her ceremony. When she found out I was not, she still ended up hiring me anyway because of the way I handled the interview. So during the interview process, when I am meeting with couples and they obviously haven't hired me yet, you know, what are the kind of things that you recommend that I would ask? Because sometimes I feel like I ask, okay, so how do I identify? And I don't know if that offends people or not. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Yeah.
So I always lead in all of my kind of pre-booking consults. I always lead with my own pronouns. And I always invite folks to share their pronouns and then anything additional they want to share about their identity or relationship, and I leave it at that. So trying to strike that balance between not asking, you know, kind of prying questions about someone's identity, but creating space for them to share about their identity feels really important to me. I also just make a point on my own website and in my contracts of sharing my business ethics and commitments, so that anybody seeking me out as a client knows that I'm committed to working with LGBTQIA plus clients and clients who are at the very least supportive and inclusive of that community and those identities. And I have a no tolerance policy written into my contracts that anybody who kind of violates my ethical commitments to identity-based respect can be terminated as a client, and that I seek to work with clients who really robustly embody those values as well. So I find leading with that in my paperwork and in my advertising tends to draw clients to me who already align with that. And then creating as much space for people to share what they want to is the best way to go.
Okay, I definitely will try that, because I mean, I didn't obviously do too bad because I have officiated for you know, a lot of LGBTQ couples, and so I often wonder if, you know, when I'm going through that process, if they were upset by something that I said, but more or less I wait for them to share with me and then move on once they have given me like the in kind of thing, you know. So I don't know if that helps, but it seems to. But definitely thanks for that information. I just wrote some things down, and I think maybe adding to my already 6-page contract, the information that you just said, I might just add in there as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
More to read. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. Let's see, and let's go ahead and throw this back to Jessica. She has her hand up.
Hello again. Someone posted in the chat a little bit earlier during your talk, just asking for kind of general ideas on how to get started and how to kind of attract clients and meet clients. And I know you kind of just talked about that a little bit, but if I was just starting out and I wanted to make sure, yes, people knew I'm welcoming, but like also just how to get started, what advice do you have on that?
Yeah, so I definitely, for the first few years that I was an officiant, I did a lot of small ceremonies for friends and family members. So just kind of letting people know that that is something that I can do if they're interested. Building that experience was really important for me to do slowly. And then when I was ready to take the next step, I asked a lot of friends who already ran small businesses doing this kind of thing for advice. And I built a website and people found me. And I think in part that was because some of my work is niche. So I work with specific populations, and forefronting that on my website and on my social media meant that when people Google search queer wedding officiant Nashville, my name is the first name that comes up. But also, you know, even if you don't do especially niche work, if you build a simple website and you build some social media and you connect with other folks who are connected to American Marriage Ministry, say, you will start to build a little bit of a network. And I simply put an inquiry form on my website and started getting inquiries immediately. I continue to do a combination of just relying on cold call inquiries, but also primarily I get referrals through word of mouth. So it's also reaching out to other kinds of wedding vendors, wedding planners, especially, but also things like photographers who work with clients regularly, who care about the same things you do and who might recommend you to their own clients, and saying, hey, I'm new. If you have clients who you think I would be a good fit for, please feel free to send them my contact information. Connecting in that way as well can make a big difference.
Awesome. There's a couple more questions in the chat. So we got one from Joanna. How do you interact with vendors who may not be as welcoming as you?
Yeah. And that's a really important one. And this is important for me as an officiant, but also because I wear a planner hat as well. So I do a lot of vendor vetting in general. And in either role, the most important thing for me is ensuring that my clients are respected. So when I interact with vendors, if I have an opportunity to assist clients in vetting or thinking through using another vendor, I will share my experience with them as candidly as possible, and not in a way of attempting to badmouth another professional, but in a way of just saying, this vendor isn't especially welcoming, and I worry about you having the celebratory and inclusive event that you might like. And if it is a vendor who I have to work for, they've already been hired in some capacity, I draw a very hard line in remembering that I have a responsibility to my clients first, and simply having professional, clear, and affirmative language around identity and around pronouns, etc., that makes it clear that these are my expectations of interaction, regardless if someone is affirming or not. And that tends to, people don't like to make a scene on wedding days. So it tends to be that if you lead with that kind of firm politeness and commitment to your expectations for that interaction, people will respond to that pretty well.
Lovely. And then it looks like somebody has a question about the commitment certificates. Do you happen to know of any resources this person might be able to reach out to?
I like to make my own on Canva.
Mm.
So getting creative and making your own. I'm sure you could find like someone on Etsy who makes some. I have found the couples I've worked with on commitment ceremonies really enjoy the opportunity to design their own. So we tend to work together and make something that feels like them and sweet on Canva.
That's very fun. Canva is a great resource. Let's see. We also have another question. How do you address a person getting married instead of bride or groom that's respectful for all types of couples?
Yes, I love this. My favorite go-tos are spouse, marrier, committed partner. Partner, if that's language that feels good to people. Those are my go-tos. Especially if you have, say, a non-binary couple or someone who is non-binary involved, using language like spouse or partner is a great thing to do. Also, you can ask the couple if they have something they prefer, much the same way that you may hear about LGBTQIA plus folks coming up with creative names for them to be referred to as parents, say, like going by pair as a shortened version of parent instead of mom or dad, or something like that. People come up with their own creative names for how they want to be referred to as a spouse. And so you can also ask them and use that.
That's a great one. And then also we have some certificates that offer a variety of vow renewals and marriage languages offered in our AMM store. So we went ahead and threw that up to the chat. So if you guys want to check that out as well, but also, like we said, Canva was a fantastic resource. So we still have a little bit of time left. If anybody has any burning questions, we'd love to hear them. Let's see. Oh, we got one popping into the chat. I have my first wedding in 2 weeks and I get nervous when speaking in front of people. What advice would you give me?
Yes, absolutely. I also get nervous speaking in front of people and always have. And I facilitate trainings for a living and officiate weddings for a living. And so I encounter this every single day. And my advice would be, one, to remember that the couple's more nervous than you are. And so some of that pressure is taken off of you. And two, that everybody stumbles on some bit of language, tiny part of the ceremony, etc. And generally, what I have found is that when that happens, it makes the couple feel more at ease, and everybody can take a little bit of a breath and say, okay, we're all people here. This doesn't have to be a moment for perfectionism. So I would say, you know, prepare yourself with water, something minty to chew on to kind of calm your nerves. Know your script well and have extra copies of it. And then just remember that they're more nervous than you are. And I'm sure you'll do a great job.
Fantastic. We had a question. Do you have a special poem or reading for same-sex couples that you like?
I tend to defer to what the couple's kind of favorite texts are. When people need references, I've had couples go do Jane Austen poems. I have had couples do have had the SCOTUS decision for the legalization of same-sex marriage read. I have had couples do Mary Oliver as a queer poet who they enjoy having read, sections of their favorite songs from queer musicians, or sections of books written from their favorite people. Like I said earlier, if people are looking for scripture, I might direct them to the Queer Bible Commentary so that they can find something that is affirming, and additional commentary on why it is affirming. Those are some places I direct people, but in general, I say, you know, what do you like to read? What do you like to watch? What do you like to listen to? That feels important to you as a couple in your relationship. You have permission to consider those things sacred and to integrate them into your ceremony.
Great. And then let's see, we also had another question, kind of along the lines of, you know, you're being nervous. This person has a couple that's very nervous. How do you handle that?
Oh yeah, I've had lots of couples who are super nervous. I do that a few ways. So at that point in time, I will kind of flip the dynamic that I just shared with you, and I'll let them know I'm up there with the script. You've got someone here who's going to tell you everything you need to say. We've talked it through together. You just have to repeat after me or count on me to hand you this piece of paper that has the vows you're supposed to read, etc. So yes, you all are up here in front of all of your loved ones doing this thing, but know that you are not up there alone. You have someone guiding you through this process. I also ask them, you know, if there's anything I can do additionally to help calm their nerves. I always keep gum on me. I take as much extra elements of worry off of them as possible. If they're worried about who might be holding the rings, who might be holding the vows, etc., I'm like, I have pockets. That's what they're for. Give them all to me. When my couples arrive in front of me for a ceremony, I always have them pause, ensure that they're actually standing close to each other, look at each other and take a deep breath. And I might cover my mic and just say, it's just us right now. You know, it's just the three of us right here. Everybody else, it doesn't matter. And that tends to be a way of calming them down.
I love that. Okay, and then we have another question here. Do you have any website that you suggest an officiant can advertise to officiate LGBTQ+ weddings?
Yes. So one of the companies that I loved that I believe has since closed up shop for now, who I used to advertise with, was Catalyst Wedding Company. Another go-to wedding company that I do love and have worked with a lot is Dancing with Her and their branch Dancing with Them, who advertise worldwide queer inclusive wedding vendors. And then American Marriage Ministries, ensuring that your profile is registered on their website is a great way to go. And then building your own website and including that in your about information is also a wonderful way to go. I also know that regionally in a lot of different areas of the country, there tend to be different forms of inclusive wedding vendor expos or conferences. So kind of doing some research and seeing if there's anything like that in your area. Maybe also if you live in a major metro area, reaching out to your local LGBTQ business chamber. Even Nashville has one. So there, I'm sure, you know, major cities like Seattle, New York, DC, Chicago, etc., you can likely find a group of local businesses that you can also advertise through.
Right. Okay. And then we had another question. Are there any unity ceremonies that you typically recommend for queer couples?
Sure. I don't know that I have any that I recommend in particular for queer couples, but some of my favorites that get away from the regular kind of candle lighting are things like planting a plant together. I had a couple who gathered soil from everywhere that the two of them had lived and planted a plant in the mixture of all of that soil. I have lots of couples who love hand fasting. So one way that I have had couples queer that is by gathering pride flag colors and doing hand fasting and ribbons with pride flag colors. So that's one way to go that is especially queer. Yeah, there's all kinds of options there.